The morning light filtered softly through the blinds, painting slivers of warmth across the kitchen floor. I stood by the counter, pouring myself a cup of coffee, savoring the aroma that had become a quiet ritual after decades of early mornings. At 62, I had long retired from the office, yet I remained the quiet backbone of this home. Every brick, every wall, a testament to years of hard work and sacrifice. The house I had paid for, the mortgage cleared years ago, should have been my sanctuary. But lately, it felt like a stage where my presence was tolerated rather than appreciated. My daughter, Lila, moved about the kitchen with her usual brisk efficiency, humming a tune that contrasted with the tension I felt simmering beneath my calm exterior. Her husband, Darren, leaned casually against the island, scrolling through his phone. Yet every glance he gave me carried a hint of dismissal I had learned to read over the years. I noticed the subtle ways they positioned themselves, the slight angle of the body, the tight smile, the brief eye contact, or lack thereof. Guests would be arriving soon for brunch, and the anticipation of performing normalcy weighed heavier than I expected. It happened mid-conversation, almost as if rehearsed for maximum subtlety. Darren's comment floated over the clatter of plates, casual and indifferent, yet sharp enough to cut. "Why don't you just sleep on the couch tonight?" A pause followed, as though he expected no one to notice. Lila's lips tightened, eyes flickering briefly toward me, unsure how much to betray her own unease. Guests shuffled slightly, an awkward silence stretching like a taut rope. I held my cup tighter, feeling the porcelain dig into my palms, heart quickening, not from fear, but from the sting of familiarity. This was not the first slight, nor would it be the last. The weight of years pressed against me as I recalled every sacrifice that had built this household. Late nights budgeting, covering tuition, tending to every scraped knee and emotional hurt that crossed my children's path. I had been the constant, the invisible provider. And yet here I was, in my own home, suggested relegated to the couch, as if my contributions meant nothing. My jaw tightened, and a flicker of anger stirred in my chest, tempered by the careful control I had honed over decades. This was humiliation cloaked in casual speech. Memories rose unbidden. The previous Thanksgiving, when my advice had been ignored, leaving me to clean the aftermath while everyone else celebrated. The time I had stayed up through illness to drive Lila to her early morning classes, only to be met with a perfunctory nod of thanks. Each recollection was a small knot in the fabric of frustration that now wrapped around me tightly. I could feel the bitter taste of invisibility, a quiet anger that simmered but did not yet boil over. I reminded myself, observation first, confrontation later. Patience was a weapon, often underestimated by those who wielded carelessness as arrogance. I settled into the chair, pretending to sip my coffee while my mind catalogued every subtle gesture, every slight, every unsaid insult. The couch before me seemed almost symbolic, a piece of furniture meant to hold me in a place of discomfort. Yet it now represented an unspoken challenge. Could they sense the quiet calculation behind my eyes? I considered how I might respond later, when words and actions could carry the weight they deserved. For now, restraint would serve me better than immediate confrontation. I studied Darren's posture, the casual tilt of his head, and Lila's nervous glance, noting the ripple of tension among the guests who hadn't yet arrived. Minutes passed with the slow drag of civility, punctuated by my internal debate. Should I confront this slight now, risk making a scene, or let it linger, letting them reveal more of themselves through each misstep? I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth steady my pulse, and resolved to gather more evidence of their disregard. My mind traced the patterns, recalling gestures, offhand comments, and moments when I had been minimized. Each detail was a thread, weaving a tapestry of truth I could later unfold. Strength, I reminded myself, was quiet but resolute. By mid-morning, the first guests arrived, their greetings light and unaware of the tension that hung like humidity in the air. I smiled politely, letting the conversation flow without betraying the storm building beneath the surface. Observing, noting, cataloging, it was a skill I had perfected over years of navigating family dynamics. Each laugh, each shrug, each casual remark added to the understanding of how deeply my presence had been undervalued. And yet, I held a steady calm, knowing the moment for my response would come. As the brunch progressed, I drifted into brief reflections, comparing today's slight with countless others. I remembered a forgotten anniversary, a dismissed achievement, the invisible labor that had gone unacknowledged. Each memory intensified the subtle anger that simmered in my chest. Yet, I did not give it voice. The true power lay in discernment, in watching, in understanding exactly when and how to act. There would be no rashness, only measured, intelligent response. The guests chattered around me, oblivious to the silent scrutiny taking place in their midst. It was in a fleeting glance toward the couch that I felt the full weight of displacement, not merely a piece of furniture, but a symbol of diminished presence. I imagined myself there, relegated to a peripheral space, and let a controlled shiver run through me. A plan began to form, not immediate retaliation, but preparation, a strategic response to ensure that my voice, long ignored, would finally command attention. I recalled lessons from a lifetime of observation, timing, patience, and the knowledge that true impact is delivered when least expected. The stage was set. I was merely waiting for the cue. By late morning, a brief hush fell over the room as I noticed Darren's smirk, followed by a quick glance at Lila, almost a silent question. Had I felt the sting? I let my expression remain composed, masking the flaring indignation within. Thoughts raced through my mind, calculating, anticipating, remembering. How would I turn these small humiliations into a moment of undeniable clarity? Each word spoken to me, each glance, each passive gesture was now catalogued, ready to be used in the unfolding strategy of acknowledgement and subtle retribution. Finally, I stepped away from the table for a moment, walking to the kitchen counter where a small, unopened email caught my attention. My eyes skimmed the subject line, heart skipping at the hint of information that might expose hidden layers of family deceit. I let my fingers linger on the keyboard, a brief pause to gather composure. This email, unnoticed by others, could be the first signal that the surface civility hid deeper undercurrents. For now, I simply observed, letting the tension build, feeling the quiet, measured power of someone who had endured, calculated, and prepared. The morning air felt heavier than usual as I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue. Sleep had been uneasy. I had replayed Darren's offhand comment about the couch countless times, each repetition pressing deeper into my mind. Lila had shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between me and him, but no one spoke up. The guests had been polite, but their polite smiles couldn't mask the tension that lingered like a thick fog. I leaned against the counter, staring out the kitchen window, trying to untangle the threads of my humiliation without giving it away. It wasn't just one careless remark. It was part of a pattern, one I had felt creeping through the years, small dismissals that piled like snow until the weight became undeniable. The realization settled like concrete in my chest. This was recurring, intentional, and it was time to acknowledge it, even if silently for now. Breakfast passed with careful observation. Darren positioned himself at the head of the table, subtly asserting dominance, while Lila placed herself close to him, a protective instinct or simple complicity, I couldn't tell. I noted how the toast plate was closer to him, the condiments favoring his reach, small details that would escape most, but not me. I sipped my coffee slowly, cataloging each microaggression, the flinch when I reached for the butter, the sharp glance when I offered to pour juice for everyone. Even the empty chair across from me felt like a statement, a silent acknowledgement that my presence was tolerated, but not respected. The room buzzed with polite conversation, yet beneath it all, the subtle hierarchy was clear. I let a quiet rage build, tempering it with the knowledge that patience would serve me better than confrontation in these early hours. As the conversation moved around the table, a message popped up on Darren's phone, and I noticed his smirk before he even glanced at me. Something about that look, the hidden satisfaction, set off an instinct I hadn't felt in years. My mind traced patterns I had overlooked, noticing a slight shift in his tone when discussing the house, the way he subtly belittled my input during last week's neighborhood planning meeting. The realization struck like lightning. There were motives here, concealed, calculated. My pulse quickened, but I held still, drinking in the scene, letting each revelation settle. I could sense the beginnings of a larger scheme, one that I would need to navigate carefully, with intelligence and discretion. Caution was paramount. Reaction would come later, in its own time, on my terms. I began to reclaim small spaces subtly. I moved my coffee cup back to my preferred spot, adjusted a pillow on the couch with a deliberate air of ownership, rearranged a family photo so that it faced outward clearly on the mantel. These gestures were small but meaningful, each one a quiet assertion that my presence was neither invisible nor inconsequential. My mind cataloged inconsistencies, noting which of Darren's statements contradicted reality, how Lila hesitated before speaking, how their interactions hinted at a deeper rift. I traced back every slight, every dismissal, building a mental map of where leverage lay and where I could exert quiet control. Patience would turn to strategy, observation into action, and I would be ready when the time came. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. A neighbor, Mrs. Carter, came in with her usual cheerful concern, asking about weekend plans and complimenting the kitchen. Her eyes, however, betrayed awareness. They flicked briefly to me, as if acknowledging the subtle tensions that no one dared speak aloud. I smiled, thanked her for noticing, and engaged in light conversation, letting the social cues reinforce the message. I was present, engaged, and not to be underestimated. She left, and I lingered by the door, the quiet validation sparking a renewed sense of empowerment. Even if overlooked by my own family, the broader world could see the worth I had quietly accrued for decades. Returning to the kitchen, I noticed a folded note, partially hidden beneath a placemat, easily overlooked. My heart skipped, sensing immediacy, significance. It was not meant to be ignored. I knew instinctively that it contained information that could shift the balance in this ongoing dynamic. I picked it up slowly, letting the paper's weight mirror the gravity of the revelation it promised. My mind raced, not with panic, but with measured anticipation. Every action, every small strategic move I had considered, now gained context. The day had begun with quiet reflection, but the undercurrents of betrayal were surfacing, calling for careful observation, deliberate patience, and the eventual assertion of the respect I had long earned but been denied. I woke up to the quiet hum of the neighborhood, the morning sun spilling over the blinds and casting long shadows across the living room floor. Coffee in hand, I sank into my favorite chair and let my thoughts drift to the past few days, tracing the subtle disrespect that had accumulated like dust in the corners of this house. It wasn't just yesterday's couch incident. No, it had been years of quiet dismissals, slight gestures, overlooked contributions, each one a thread in a pattern I was only now fully seeing. Darren's smirk at breakfast, the way Lila had hesitated to meet my eyes, the misplacement of my things in rooms I had painstakingly arranged. It all clicked into a disconcerting realization. I had been underestimated, overlooked, invisible, despite every sacrifice I had made. The weight of recognition pressed on me, but beneath it stirred a cautious determination. Awareness alone was not enough. Strategy would have to follow. By mid-morning, I found myself observing the subtle interplay of family dynamics with a keener eye. Darren flitted from one room to the next, his laughter light but edged with control, Lila shadowing him, adding little affirmations to his words. I noted the way he positioned himself in conversation, ensuring he dominated the frame, and how every small oversight or misstep of mine seemed to amuse him quietly. I moved my coffee cup slightly closer, subtly reclaiming the space I had long treated as mine, and straightened the cushion on the couch I had bought with my own hands. Each minor act was a reminder to myself, and silently, to them. I was present. I wasn't blind, and I wasn't passive. Thoughts raced through my mind, mapping weaknesses, inconsistencies, and small openings. It wasn't yet time to confront. Patience was a tool, one I wielded with deliberate care, sharpening my awareness with every glance, every slight. Later, a small brunch was arranged, a few close family friends joining in the sunlit dining area. The room seemed cheerful at first, but beneath the chatter, microaggressions threaded through like a current too strong to ignore. Darren made offhand remarks, subtle digs cloaked in humor, while Lila offered half-smiles that betrayed unease. I kept my composure, sipping tea slowly, letting the words pass over me while cataloging each slight. The tilt of a head, a hand brushing past mine, a conversation interrupted just as I spoke. These were small, almost imperceptible shifts, yet together they painted a clear picture. The storm within me brewed quietly, controlled but insistent. I would act, but the timing had to be mine, the strategy precise, unassailable. I took mental notes on everyone's reactions, watching who deferred, who ignored, who aligned with the subtle power plays. Even friends and neighbors present that morning offered cues, a slight nod here, a quirked brow there, signaling unspoken truths I had long suspected. I mapped the room, the placement of chairs, personal items left unattended, using them as symbolic markers of control. My coffee cup, the decorative vase on the mantel, the exact spot my keys had been left, each a piece of the puzzle, a subtle assertion of presence and awareness. This quiet observation reinforced my resolve. Patience and intelligence could outmatch ignorance and deceit, and I intended to wield both. Then, as the sunlight shifted across the polished floor, I caught a glimpse of something, a folded note partially hidden behind a stack of napkins on the sideboard. My pulse quickened, suspicion sharpening into clarity. It wasn't a casual oversight. It was meant for me, meant to reveal or perhaps manipulate. I retrieved it slowly, letting the weight in my hand echo the gravity of what I might uncover. My mind traced back every dismissal, every sly smile, every casual slight. They had underestimated me, repeated it time and again, assuming I would remain passive. But awareness had a power of its own, and I was no longer blind. The quiet storm had risen within me, steady, deliberate, and resolute, ready to turn observation into action when the moment demanded. The morning light filtered through the blinds, painting lines across the hardwood floor that seemed sharper than usual. I stood in the kitchen, coffee mug warming my hands, replaying the subtle indignities that had become almost routine. Darren's pointed remarks, the way Lila glanced past me with a half-smile, the careless placement of my belongings, all threads in a web I had finally learned to recognize. It wasn't carelessness. It was strategy. Every slight, every dismissive glance carried intent. I had to remind myself, stay calm, observe, and gather clarity before any overt action. That quiet frustration had begun to harden into determination, a steeliness I hadn't felt in years. As breakfast unfolded, I scanned the room, noting who moved in tandem with Darren and who simply observed. The way my daughter tilted her head, hesitated, then nodded to Darren, subtle cues that revealed allegiance. Cousins, neighbors, even the family dog's placement in the room seemed to participate unconsciously in the hierarchy. I traced the movements, the exchanges, the minute gestures that, while invisible to the untrained eye, signaled power plays. Each sip of coffee was deliberate, grounding me in the reality that I was no longer invisible. My presence, my ownership of this home, and my intellect would assert themselves quietly but unmistakably. That misplaced family photo on the mantel became a symbol of all I had contributed yet never claimed, a silent witness to the ongoing games. Later that morning, a small brunch was underway, the chatter lively, but punctuated by barbed comments cloaked in humor. Darren made a joke about the arrangement of the seating, the words light, but the edge undeniable. Lila laughed softly, eyes flicking toward me, testing the waters. I let the conversation wash over me, cataloging each subtle insult. I straightened the cushion on the chair I'd always claimed as mine, quietly reclaiming a sense of authority in the physical space, asserting my presence without words. My mind raced with strategies, noting weaknesses in Darren's casual control, identifying openings for subtle interventions. Every nuance, every glance was a piece of the puzzle, a map toward leverage I hadn't exercised in years. Throughout the afternoon, I moved deliberately, observing more than participating. A friend of the family commented on a small domestic arrangement, an innocuous remark revealing awareness of my contribution. I responded with a simple smile, acknowledging without exposing the depth of my awareness. The emotional tide surged quietly, a mix of frustration and emerging confidence. Each small interaction, each exchanged glance, fed into a broader pattern I now understood. The family dynamics were not just casual, they were battlegrounds of influence, perception, and control. I would navigate this carefully, maintaining patience while planning my next moves, letting the storm within simmer with quiet intensity. By evening, whispers across the kitchen carried hints of maneuvering I couldn't ignore. Darren leaned slightly toward a family friend, words low but precise, and I caught fragments, a plan, a strategy, a subtle attempt to manipulate perceptions. My heart steadied, and a surge of clarity replaced the initial sting. Observation had become power. I organized my thoughts, reinforcing mental maps of alliances, anticipating the moves, readying myself for the right moment to assert authority. The room seemed smaller, more charged. Every interaction now carried significance, a dance I would lead if I timed it correctly. That quiet power, restrained yet formidable, was mine to wield. As night drew in, I lingered in the living room, the hum of the ceiling fan above matching the steady rhythm of my resolve. I could feel the tension shift around me, subtle but unmistakable, like a bowstring drawn tight. I knew Darren underestimated me, assumed patience equaled weakness, invisibility equaled acquiescence. They were about to learn otherwise. Every glance, every unspoken word, every overlooked contribution had been part of my calculus. I would wait, watch, and respond with precision. The storm inside me was quiet, but it would not remain so forever. Soon, it would rise with the force of everything I had endured and quietly observed. The sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, sharp and unyielding, much like the thoughts racing through my mind. After weeks of subtle slights, it was impossible to ignore the weight of accumulated disrespect. I cradled the old family heirloom in my hands, the polished wood warm against my skin, and reminded myself of what it represented, my contribution, my endurance, my right to be seen and heard in this house. The coffee steamed, a thin ribbon curling in the morning light, and I weighed every possible outcome of speaking up versus staying silent. There were potential allies in the room, some who understood my presence, others who simply observed. But the risk of miscalculation lingered. I could feel the controlled irritation tightening my chest, yet beneath it simmered determination, a resolve sharpened by years of patience finally converging into action. By the time breakfast arrived, the air was charged with unspoken competition. Darren's remarks, as casual as they seemed, carried sharp edges. A misdirected comment about the table's arrangement, a sly tone when offering someone else the better seat, all observed with the keen eyes of someone who had endured similar manipulations before. Lila, still caught between alliance and observation, glanced at me with a restrained smile that betrayed her uncertainty. I let the interactions unfold, cataloging each inflection and movement. A minor verbal jab, a slightly sarcastic remark about my gentle approach to managing the household, triggered the first subtle confrontation. My fingers tightened around the edge of the mug, the heat seeping into my resolve. The room seemed to pulse with tension, the seemingly casual exchanges suddenly revealing the complexity of hidden hierarchies. I responded not with anger, but with measured awareness, allowing my presence and intellect to register without overt assertion. Internal conflict churned quietly, a negotiation between civility and authority. I reflected on years of acquiescence and the cost of restraint, measuring my responses carefully. Darren's subtle attempt to manipulate perceptions, rearranging documents on the counter as if to claim oversight, did not escape me. My mind worked quickly, weighing the potential ramifications of direct confrontation against the strategic advantage of quiet observation. The small victories, reclaiming a chair, gently correcting a misplaced object, each became a calculated assertion of control. Though the interactions appeared minor, each carried significance. My heartbeat echoed the quiet anticipation of a response perfectly timed, an equilibrium of patience and readiness. The simmering defiance coiled within me, not loud or rash, but sharp, intelligent, and poised. Later, as the morning progressed into early afternoon, I moved through the house with deliberate awareness. Each glance, each word exchanged, was a piece of the larger puzzle. I observed Darren plotting in low tones, notes of manipulation seeping into casual conversation. Every subtle maneuver he made, I cataloged and translated into a mental map of weaknesses and opportunities. My responses were deliberate, each gesture, straightening a cushion, adjusting a photo frame, speaking volumes without uttering a syllable. Observers sensed the shift. The unspoken message was clear. I was no longer invisible, and my patience was tactical. I watched as the room itself seemed to recalibrate around me, the energy bending toward acknowledgement of my presence. Evening fell, but the tension did not dissipate. A whispered exchange in the hallway, caught out of the corner of my eye, carried implications of an impending maneuver. I lingered in the living room, sipping tea slowly, letting the subtle betrayals register fully. My mind charted every possible consequence, every alignment of loyalty or indifference among family members. The quiet assertion of power, executed with intelligence and control, had begun to unsettle the hierarchy Darren had assumed. I felt a deep, simmering satisfaction, not in revenge, but in recognition of my agency. The storm was no longer merely internal. It had begun to ripple outward, shifting the balance in ways invisible to anyone not paying close attention. I was ready, patient, and poised to act when the moment was right. The morning light spilled across the hardwood floors as I sipped my coffee, the bitter warmth grounding me in the present moment. Weeks of subtle disrespect and invisible dismissals had led to this morning, and I felt the weight of every slight coiling into resolve. Holding the old family heirloom in my hands, the smooth curves of its wood felt reassuring, reminding me of my contributions, my endurance, and the home I had built with my own hands. I took a deep breath, considering the reactions of Darren and the others if I finally chose to speak, to assert, to stand. The quiet determination within me had been growing, a simmering storm ready to emerge at the first hint of provocation. Each choice felt significant, measured, deliberate, and necessary. By mid-morning, a casual social gathering had formed in the living room, laughter and small talk filling the space like a false calm before a storm. Darren's tone, sharp yet seemingly casual, attempted to undermine me with offhand remarks and subtle manipulations. I observed each movement, each glance, cataloging intent and implication. A minor verbal jab, an insinuation about my approach to family management, caught me fully aware and unflinching. I responded not with anger, but with a carefully chosen word, a firm placement of presence that made the room pause. The dynamic had shifted. Subtlety had become my weapon. Frustration fueled my measured actions, transforming indignation into precision. I allowed the moment to stretch, feeling the tension ripple outward, signaling to all observers that I was no longer to be overlooked. Every gesture was deliberate. I redirected conversations with quiet authority, seated myself with assurance, and managed interactions with tactful attention. When I uncovered Darren's hidden slight, an attempt to misrepresent my intentions to a visiting family friend, I countered with calm clarity, my response both pointed and dignified. Satisfaction coursed through me as I realized control had shifted, however slightly. My strategy unfolded seamlessly, subtle, intelligent, composed. Each minor maneuver became a statement of agency, a demonstration of inner strength tempered by patience. The room, previously weighted by imbalances, now felt subtly recalibrated. Eyes followed my actions, noticing the shift without words. Some supportive, others challenged. I felt pride rising, not from victory, but from reclaiming authority over my own space. Even as the afternoon sunlight waned, my mind remained alert, anticipating the ripple effects of this first assertion. I traced potential moves, predicting reactions, preparing for the inevitable counterplays that would test patience and intellect. The subtle hints of plotting by Darren were no longer invisible. I perceived each attempt at manipulation and cataloged it for later, transforming uncertainty into strategic advantage. The calm patience I exhibited masked the controlled anger simmering beneath. a readiness that made even small gestures carry weight. Allies and observers alike adjusted to the presence I projected, strong, poised, unyielding. By evening, a whispered remark, overheard yet deliberate, signaled that the next round of maneuvering was imminent. I listened quietly, absorbing meaning while maintaining composure. My body relaxed, but my mind remained vigilant, tracing the patterns, assessing the environment, and preparing to respond with precision. This was no longer a house where I was merely tolerated. It was a space where I would assert, where subtle defiance met intelligence, and where calculated action would define the coming days. I understood fully that this turning point was more than a moment. It was a declaration of agency, a testament to years of endurance, and the beginning of a shift that others would notice, whether they welcomed it or not. The morning air felt crisp through the kitchen window as I sipped my coffee, the taste grounding me in clarity. I reflected on the subtle victories over Darren in recent days, the small assertions of space, the quiet corrections of his manipulations. Yet, I knew the day ahead would demand more than quiet defiance. I set the family heirloom carefully on the counter, its familiar weight anchoring my resolve. I replayed every conversation, every glance, measuring the intentions beneath polite smiles and casual remarks. This was no longer about being tolerated, it was about exposing the truth hidden beneath layers of deceit. I allowed my mind to map the household, noting allies, indifferent observers, and those complicit in Darren's games. Each step, each word, had to be precise, measured, a chess move in a battle long overdue. By mid-morning, the family had gathered for a casual brunch, and the atmosphere buzzed with polite conversation, masking tension. Darren, unaware that his schemes had been perceived, engaged in his subtle provocations, underhanded compliments, and dismissive comments aimed to diminish me. I observed everything, the timing of his words, the shifting glances, the unspoken cues of manipulation. Then it happened. A calculated slight regarding my handling of family traditions. I let the moment hang for a heartbeat before responding, not with loud indignation, but with measured wit and calm authority. The room shifted in awareness, my subtle assertiveness forcing Darren into a brief, uncertain silence. Triumph, quiet but satisfying, surged through me. My control of the situation had begun to assert itself. The brunch progressed with careful attention to every nuance. I subtly redirected conversations, highlighted overlooked accomplishments with gentle precision, and allowed Darren's attempts at domination to unravel under scrutiny. A hidden misrepresentation aimed at friends or neighbors was discovered mid-meal, his attempt to rewrite the narrative of my role in the household. I countered gracefully, presenting facts with calm clarity that left observers nodding quietly, some in support, others in restrained disapproval of his tactics. Satisfaction came not from embarrassment inflicted, but from restoring balance, from demonstrating intelligence and foresight. The power dynamic shifted imperceptibly but unmistakably. As the gathering neared its close, I noted reactions around the table, subtle acknowledgments from those who had watched quietly, discomfort in Darren's posture, and a shift in the energy of the room. Allies, once passive, were now more attentive. Antagonists hesitated in their usual maneuvers. I felt a controlled surge of pride, tempered by awareness that the game was far from over. Every movement, every glance, was a piece of the unfolding strategy, a declaration that I would no longer remain unseen or undervalued. The heirloom on the counter, a silent witness, reinforced the legacy I protected and the strength I had cultivated through years of endurance. As the family dispersed, a whispered remark reached my ears, intended to undermine the very victories I had claimed. I paused, listening with quiet precision, noting the subtle implications and hidden agendas in play. The day's confrontations had revealed cracks in Darren's carefully maintained facade, yet the underlying strategies were still active, ready to emerge in the next encounter. My mind raced with possible responses, plotting measured moves to maintain authority while preserving composure. This was a battle of wits, and I was fully engaged, prepared to expose truth and deception alike without succumbing to impulsive reaction. The foundation for the next chapter was laid, the pieces in place, and the anticipation of further revelation hummed in the air. The morning air was heavy with anticipation, yet calm enough to mask the storm I knew was coming. I stood in the kitchen, sifting through the neatly organized stack of papers and emails I had gathered over weeks of careful observation. Each document, each note, each recorded conversation was a piece of the puzzle, a silent witness to the subtle manipulations and dismissals that had accumulated over the years. I took a deep breath, my hands resting on the family heirloom I had placed prominently as a quiet reminder of my strength and endurance. The calm before the confrontation allowed me to center myself, to anticipate reactions, to plan precisely when and how the truth would be laid bare. Every calculated move had been considered, timing, audience, placement, so that the revelation could strike with maximum impact, yet without losing composure. By mid-morning, the family had assembled for brunch, the living room buzzing with polite conversation, masking underlying tension. Darren arrived, exuding confidence as usual, oblivious to the meticulous groundwork I had laid. I watched every gesture, every subtle glance, timing my actions with careful precision. I began with a small public revelation, a misstatement he had made weeks ago, now documented and undeniable. The effect was immediate, a flicker of shock on his face, subtle murmurs among the family, eyes darting between him and me. I maintained calm, letting the evidence speak louder than any outburst ever could. The satisfaction of seeing the initial hesitation ripple through the room fueled a quiet exhilaration. The balance was beginning to shift. As the brunch progressed, I intensified my strategic push. Conversations were guided to draw out discrepancies, while further proof exposed manipulations that Darren had thought invisible. I revealed the misrepresentations he had made about my role in family decisions, pointing to emails and receipts he could no longer deny. Allies quietly nodded in support, while antagonists exchanged uneasy glances. The room's energy shifted, tension rising as the truth asserted itself with undeniable clarity. I felt a surge of empowerment, my patience and intelligence validated in real time. Every calculated observation, every note from previous weeks coalesced into a decisive demonstration of control and moral authority. The climax came swiftly. Darren attempted a last-minute diversion, a thinly veiled accusation meant to regain footing. I countered calmly, my words precise and factual, dismantling his attempt without aggression. The household held its collective breath as the confrontation escalated to its peak, emotions raw yet controlled. Eyes widened, some in disbelief, others with quiet admiration. The thrill of exposing truth intertwined with righteous anger, yet I remained the orchestrator, fully aware of the impact of each word, each revelation, each silent gesture. Justice, at last, commanded the room. In the aftermath, reactions varied. Some family members shifted allegiances subtly, while others absorbed the consequences with quiet reflection. I paused to internalize the moral vindication, the satisfaction of reclaiming my rightful presence in a space that had long dismissed my contributions. The heirloom seemed to radiate approval, a testament to endurance and strategy. And yet, beneath the relief, I recognized lingering currents of tension and subtle betrayals still unaddressed, hints of challenges that would require vigilance and wisdom in the chapters ahead. Though justice had been served, the echoes of past manipulations lingered in hushed corners. I knew some wounds ran deeper than any evidence could reach, yet for the first time in years, my voice carried weight, my observations commanded respect, and my presence could no longer be ignored. The household's dynamics had shifted irrevocably, and I felt prepared for whatever final resolution awaited. The day closed with a mixture of triumph and vigilance, aware that the journey toward complete restoration was nearly, but not entirely, complete. The morning was quiet, a gentle contrast to the storm of revelations that had swept through the household days before. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth ground me as I reflected on the confrontations and the aftermath. The tension that had clung to the walls seemed lighter now, the family moving through the house with more cautious respect, their interactions tinged with recognition of truths that could no longer be denied. I allowed myself a moment to acknowledge how far we had come, not just the shift in dynamics, but the clarity that came from speaking, from exposing deceit with dignity. The moral weight of the previous battles settled within me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a deep sense of calm paired with a quiet satisfaction. The room was alive with subtle gestures of acknowledgement. It was not complete peace, but the balance had begun to tilt in favor of honesty and fairness. I began to engage in small conversations, connecting with family members one by one, gauging their reactions, and offering openings for reconciliation. Some smiles were tentative, others hesitant nods, yet beneath it all, there was a willingness to rebuild connections once strained by tension and misunderstanding. Twist S18 arrived unexpectedly. A confession from a previously antagonistic relative who admitted their own part in misunderstandings, a quiet acknowledgement that shifted the room's emotional tone. Gratitude and remorse were exchanged in hushed voices, and I felt a stirring of hope, a cautious optimism that trust, once frayed, could begin to mend. The moments were intimate, filled with sincerity and a recognition that growth often comes after confrontation and reflection. In those conversations, the past's weight seemed a little lighter, replaced by an awareness of the importance of accountability and understanding. As the day unfolded, I noticed the subtle recognition of my own persistence and intelligence. Compliments arrived not with fanfare, but with genuine acknowledgement of the moral courage it took to navigate the years of subtle dismissals and manipulations. I felt pride not for triumph over others, but for the validation of perseverance, strategy, and measured assertiveness. Justice, though quiet, had been acknowledged socially and within the family, and it was grounding to feel the invisible work I had done finally recognized. Every nod, every word of acknowledgement reinforced the sense that I had reclaimed my rightful position, not as a conqueror, but as someone whose presence and voice mattered. The emotional satisfaction was palpable, and yet it was tempered by the humility that comes from surviving long trials. Even in this resolution, lingering threads remained. Some scars from the past, moments of betrayal, small humiliations, and overlooked efforts could not be fully erased. I reflected on them, considering the lessons they had imparted: resilience, patience, and the necessity of strategic thought in the face of adversity. I allowed myself to sit with the memories without resentment, understanding that personal growth often emerges from the tension between what was endured and what was learned. The quiet spaces in the house, once heavy with disregard, now carried a sense of calm authority, a reminder that I had not been defeated by the past. My reflections carried both the weight of experience and the light of emerging strength. In the evening, I moved through the house with deliberate steps, reclaiming spaces and arranging objects that had long gone unnoticed. Each action was symbolic, a quiet assertion of presence, a reinforcement of identity, and a personal closure. I lingered on the family heirloom, feeling the continuity of legacy and resilience it represented. There was satisfaction in these small, intentional gestures, a subtle declaration that life could move forward with dignity and grace. Lessons learned had transformed into strength, and the air seemed lighter, a promise that the past, while remembered, would no longer dictate the present. The household breathed differently now, infused with awareness and respect that had been earned, not demanded. Though the wounds of betrayal and misunderstanding would heal slowly, I finally recognized the depth of my own strength, the clarity of mind, the patience, and the courage that had carried me through years of subtle oppression. There was hope lingering in every interaction, tempered by the wisdom of experience, and I allowed myself to embrace it fully. The past had shaped me, but it would no longer confine me. In this quiet conclusion, I saw the possibility of a future built on fairness, integrity, and the knowledge that true power often lies in measured action, resilience, and unwavering self-respect. The journey had been arduous, but it led to clarity, dignity, and the promise of continued growth.